want to welcome Judge Ashley Moody to the TaxWatch stage. She is running for Attorney General of the state of Florida. In 2006, Ashley became the youngest judge in Florida when she was elected to the Circuit Court for the 13th Judicial Circuit in Hillsborough County. She was just 31 years old at the time. She began her legal career with the Holland & Knight law firm, and after she was there for a few years practicing commercial litigation, she joined the United States Attorney's Office as an Assistant United States Attorney prosecuting drug, firearm, and fraud offenses. She attended the University of Florida, go Gators, where she earned her bachelor's and master's degrees in accounting and her Juris Doctor degree. She later attended Stetson University College of Law, earning a Master of Law in International Law. She lives with her husband, Justin, who is a federal law enforcement agent in Tampa, with their two sons, Brandon and Connor. Welcome, Ashley.
Yes, I'm wondering, has the room been this sparse all day, or did everybody go eat?
Well, we are bumping up on lunch.
I know, I'm feeling bad I'm the last one.
You will see folks coming in and out, but thank you for being here. Welcome.
Here.
Chief Legal Officer of the state of Florida is a big job, an important job. Why do you want to be the Attorney General?
I think anyone watching our state and nation over the last few years understands that now more than ever we need someone at the top of law enforcement, and the nickname given to the Attorney General is the top cop. The head of law enforcement, someone that not only oversees statewide prosecution, but interfaces with our sheriffs across the state, 67 of those. And I tell you, when I was first thinking about doing this, the idea, although I've been a Republican since college, the idea of getting involved in partisan politics at this moment and how it has evolved and become so acrimonious and full of attacks and duplicity, almost unrecognizable, I was hesitant. And I spoke to my husband, who's a career law enforcement officer. He's a DEA agent. He was a cop in Largo, Florida before that. And I asked him how he felt about our family getting involved in this process, and it truly is that. It's a family affair. And I said, you know, I think right now we need somebody in this role that understands prosecutions, understands what law enforcement goes through, understands that the challenges that they face, the difficulties of large-scale prosecutions, and not only the complexity of prosecutions, but the dynamics between federal and state law enforcement officers, the dynamics between federal and state prosecutors. Sometimes the efforts of prosecutions, successful prosecutions, involve coordination of our white hats before we ever go after our black hats. And with the dynamics of everything going on in the state and nation, we both feel it's imperative right now that we have someone as the top cop that has prosecuted cases. And I'm the only one running in this race, Democrat or Republican, that has ever been in criminal courts on both sides of the bench, not only as a judge, but as a federal prosecutor. And so we think that with everything going on in Florida, with the dynamics that law enforcement is facing, with the opioid epidemic, elder abuse, this is not the time to have somebody that has simply been a politician in this office. It needs to be somebody that understands the role, understands how to work with the players across the state that can truly make a meaningful difference in these areas. And I was glad to do it and step up. I had to resign my position as a judge in order to run, so it was certainly a big decision. It takes a lot of getting used to.
Different attorney generals have focused on different things. Charlie Crist focused a lot on consumer issues. Bill McCullen focused a lot on trying to protect our children from child predators. General Bondi has focused on the opioid epidemic and human trafficking. What do you think will be your focus as Attorney General?
Well, as Attorney General, the role is so broad, it's hard to say that you're going to focus on one thing. Now, highlighting a particular initiative sometimes is important to bring it into the awareness of the public. It often helps actually in law enforcement endeavors. For example, human trafficking, making that more in the public conscious. We're able to recognize that when it's occurring and actually prosecute those cases. And Pam Bondi's done a great job of that. She also did a great job of drastically reducing, almost eliminating our pill mills across Florida. I think when she came in office, 98 of the top opioid prescribing doctors were in, 98 of the top 100 were in Florida. That was in 2010. By 2013, she had reduced that to 2. So no one can argue that she did it make a drastic difference. I think within 4 days in office, she was already trying to draft legislation to do that. Sometimes when you come into an office, you cannot pick what you want your initiative to be. Unfortunately, because of the success rate on reducing those pill mills, we have an addiction culture now that has evolved from pills in the opioid world to heroin, fentanyl, and carfentanyl, and certainly the synthetics in opioids are much more dangerous. I believe that carfentanyl is 10,000 times more potent than morphine. Very deadly in small doses. So we now have to tackle a different beast. Because we made such drastic strides in one area, we find now our addicts are craving other types of drugs. And so while I wish the opioid epidemic would not have to be a priority, the top law enforcement officer in Florida, working with state and local officials as well as addiction service providers and those that are providing education to our young people, it will be one of the primary roles of the next Attorney General. I wish that was not the case, but we are losing people now to opioid deaths at the rate that we lost at the height of the AIDS epidemic. We lose 15 people a day. As we sit here today and talk about who's going to be our next leader, we will lose 15 people. And as a former federal drug prosecutor, as the wife of a DEA agent, I am committed to moving the ball on this issue. From day one, I will start assembling a statewide task force. I will bring together the experts. You know, as I travel the state and meet with sheriffs, we've been endorsed by close to 40 sheriffs now. And some players in the panhandle will be doing something different than in the southern part of our state. Many people will be having great successes, yet we haven't yet figured out how to apply those and across Florida so that we're getting the most bang for our buck as we dedicate resources to this plague. So, you know, I think it's important when you're evaluating who you're going to support to lead the efforts in any of these areas, whether that be human trafficking, elder abuse, mental health, and how it intersects with our courts. You want someone who has been in the system, understands the nuances, understands the dynamics between the players, and can start running on day one. And I can do that, and I think that's what I bring to the table as Attorney General.
General Bondi has said that she is going to bring a lawsuit on behalf of the state of Florida against opioid makers. What do you think of that initiative? Would you support that kind of litigation?
Well, certainly if there is evidence to support either criminal or civil action, the Attorney General has to evaluate that and make an informed decision. You know, as someone who sat as a judge and even somebody who had the great responsibility as a federal prosecutor when even deciding whether to bring a case, I have often found that you cannot rush to judgment based on a quick reaction to something. You have to look at the statistics, you have to look at the evidence, you have to look and make sure that whatever you decide is well supported. Because I am not in that office right now, I do not have the same information that she is looking at as we sit here and evaluating whether or not to move forward with an action like that. You know, if you remember when this type of litigation was started being used in the tobacco litigation, there was specific evidence that led the Attorney Generals at that time to bring action under public nuisance and other claims. And no one can know exactly what information the AG has right now. She did some subpoena through the 42 Attorney Generals across the nation have formed a working group and had issued some civil investigative demands and subpoenas to certain manufacturers and distributors, and they've received and are receiving that information. And so it would be, I think, premature for anyone running for office at this point to tell you exactly what they would do, because we're not privy to the exact evidence that they have in their hands right now. But certainly if an action like that was well supported and showed bad actors and something that the Attorney General would have a responsibility to protect citizens of Florida, certainly I would encourage that.
We've seen crime rates in Florida and across the nation go down. We're at a 45-year low in crime, yet many of our citizens don't feel safe. We've had mass shootings here in Florida from Orlando to Parkland, and there is a growing insecurity among parents especially about children being safe in schools. That takes a lot of different law enforcement to make that happen, but as the top cop, the chief legal officer of the state of Florida, what tone would you set in order to move us forward on school safety?
I would, as the mother of a young 8-year-old who is in elementary school right now in Florida's public education system, I would say my tone would be adamant that we must take all measures to protect our children. This is not an option. We need to dedicate the proper resources and make sure our schools are safe. One way we do that is focus on children that may be demonstrating mental health issues at an early stage. As early as June, when I entered this race, I started talking about mental health and how it intersected with our justice system and how we were not using our money efficiently and how there was many actions that we could take pre-arrest to address mental health. One, saving money, which is what we all want to do in government at all times. And number two, reducing recidivism of those that are affected by mental illness issues. And this was something that early on I started talking about. I've been talking about it on the campaign trail since. Many counties across the state of Florida have already developed programs where they bring individuals that have demonstrated a propensity to act violent or that may be a danger to themselves or others to a checkpoint where they can be assessed to determine whether or not this is someone that needs to be put into the system through an arrest and incarcerated, or whether this one is someone who is demonstrating a break in mental illness and can be treated in another way, while still protecting society and our children, but focusing on whether or not we are using our taxpayer dollars in an efficient manner. And so this is something that I have not started recently talking about because of recent issues that have come up and tragic situations in our state. This is something that I've seen as a judge, as a prosecutor in this system, as someone that cares about Florida for almost 2 decades practicing law.
Illegal immigration is a huge challenge in this country. We have 12 to 13 million folks who are here by estimates that are here illegally. There's a lot of attention placed on border crossings in places like Texas and Arizona, New Mexico, California. Yet we know that most of the people who are illegally here in Florida are here illegally because they overstayed their visas. Some of whom have been here for decades, some of whom have had children that are now American citizens, some of whom brought children with them who are the so-called dreamers. It's a federal responsibility, first and foremost, to police this issue. But it is it has such an impact on the state of Florida. Oftentimes, the Attorney General's office will work with U.S. attorneys' offices in the 3 districts in Florida on issues. Do you see any role for the Attorney General on immigration issues since it is impacting our state so much?
Absolutely, and I think, and I appreciate you pointing out that everybody recognizes that we have a problem with our immigration system. And everybody recognizes that we should have tried to fix this a long time ago before we found ourselves trying to play catch up. And how irresponsible that was of our government leaders over time not to try and address this at an earlier stage where it might have been more manageable. I appreciate you recognizing that the AG has a limited ability to craft and affect immigration policy, thank you, for Florida. But what the AG can do is ensure that the laws that are on the books are enforced. And ensure that in the way that we can be involved, that our communities are protected. And oftentimes, people want to know that the AG is going to work with the sheriffs across the state, that when there are people in Florida that have committed crimes and are presenting a danger, that they are working with ICE and ensuring that they are removed from our communities. I believe that should be a priority of law enforcement. Sheriffs across the state have come up with a way to contract with ICE and help them in their efforts to remove those that are here illegally that are committing crimes in our communities. I would support that. I would challenge the other sheriffs to do the same if they are not and work with them to accomplish that. They have done it in a way that they are working within the confines of the law in order to do that, which we always, as any law enforcement leader, we want to make sure that they are doing that. And that is really one of the ways that the AG will be involved. And I appreciate you pointing that out.
Thank you. Last question for me, and then I want to open it up to the audience. Florida is a unique system because you're not just the chief legal officer, not just the top cop, but you're also on the cabinet. And I would say not just on the cabinet, because the Attorney General is looked to by the other 3 cabinet members on questions of law. You're not their lawyer, but you definitely have I would say, oversized role on the cabinet. I would contend second only to the governor, because Many questions deal with issues of law. What's your thoughts about how you're going to lead on the cabinet and tell the folks here about the AG's role in it and how you envision it?
Well, recognizing that the AG will be one of the 4 cabinet members that really is responsible and a guardian for the state, you want to make sure it's someone coming in that's going to make decisions not based on an emotional or guttural reaction, that it's going to be someone that takes into account all positions or views, studies again the well-researched data that's presented, and makes very deliberate, rational decisions. And one of the things you learn as a judge is that oftentimes what you think your position may be initially, after you've taken into account all of the information provided and seen what has happened and occurred over time and looked at the data, your position may be different. And I think really people want servants on the cabinet that can be measured and deliberative and have had experience doing that. And I bring that. I had over a decade as a circuit court judge where I had to make very, very tough decisions. Oftentimes those decisions made people unhappy, but I tried to do them based on what I felt was best for the community, what I felt was best for the parties at hand if it involved a dispute involving families. But I can say without a doubt, I always followed the law, regardless of my personal preferences, regardless of what I thought personally the outcome should be. I always followed the law. And you can rest assured that in my function as AG, in my function as a member of this important cabinet overseeing Florida, that I will make very conscious, deliberate, well-reasoned decisions and stay within my very limited scope of power, which has been given to me by the citizens of the state of Florida.
Let me open it up for questions.
Hi there, Chelsea Murphy. I am the State Director for Right on Crime. I've got it actually written out, otherwise I'll lose my train of thought. So there's a strong support for reforming Florida's criminal justice system for both the right and the left. A poll commissioned in 2017 by Right on Crime using Fabrizio and Lee revealed a 2-to-1 margin from registered Floridians, and they believe that the primary purpose of the criminal justice system should be to rehabilitate rather than to punish. 2/3 or more of both voter groups support allowing Florida state judges to cut 3- and 5-year mandatory minimum sentences by up to 2/3 for first-time drug offenders when they believe the mandatory minimum sentence is inappropriate based on the crime committed.
I'm gonna forget your question.
I'm sorry, yeah. What are your thoughts on mandatory minimum sentences for first-time drug offenders?
Well, I think and this is a great example. I'm glad you asked that question. I promise she's not a plant. I think the data would show that minimum mandatory sentences may not be having the effect that we originally intended when these were passed a long time ago, specifically as it relates to the longer minimum mandatory sentences. Now, with regards to the shorter ones, there is some support for showing that if we use them in the right cases, they will help reduce what we're trying to achieve. I'll just give you an example with the synthetic drugs that are plaguing Florida. You want to make sure that those that are supplying these drugs that are true traffickers, that are killing people, that we can remove them from society even for a short period of time, mandatorily, while we deal with the other players and victims in this addiction situation we find ourselves in. But, you know, I think you could look at my history as both a lawyer and as a judge and know that I think that there is rarely a situation where a one-size-fits-all approach to an offender is the right way to go. I always took the view that each offender in each particular case needed to be looked at with regards to that specific person's offense, what we were trying to accomplish as a society in terms of tamping down on particular type of crime and ensuring that our communities were protected. I tried to do that throughout my legal career. I think that's the way we should approach it as legislators and policymakers, and I would advocate that as the Attorney General.
Judge Moody, hi. My name is Renata Espinoza. I'm a principal. And I have, in Palm Beach County, I have two questions for you. One is about human trafficking. There is a problem in Palm Beach County in human trafficking, and it starts in middle school. Because of Law Week, we only get one lawyer to speak to our middle school students, and I've noticed I talk to other principals, they do it the same way. Would you make sure, or if you're elected as an AG, would you make sure there is more resources for lawyers to come out or in your office to make sure they can talk about human trafficking, especially it starts in middle school? Because some of these kids, especially in Title I schools, they don't talk to their parents, and they confine in guidance counselors or principals, but they don't see it enough. And in 1 week in Law Week, it's not gonna happen. So what's your take on that?
Well, instead of sitting up here as somebody who's asking for your vote and support, I'm not going to tell you what I will do. I'll tell you what I've done. And maybe that will demonstrate for you how important I feel it is that we as community members are engaged with our public school system and our schools in general to make sure that we are going in and educating our students, not only on things that they can be, but things they can need to stay away from. And so on numerous instances, I would say probably over 100 instances, spoke with elementary school students about the dangers of certain types of crime. And of course, always being younger in the judicial profession, I always felt like that gave me an up, that they might listen to me in ways that they might not listen to others, and I always made that a priority. I also worked with lawyers to coordinate them going into schools. So it may not be just human trafficking, but for an example, when I was a private lawyer, I did business defense work with Holland and Knight. That's how I started my career. And I organized a group of lawyers that every certain amount of time we would go into the local elementary school and read to the students and talk to them about what we did. It was a local at-risk school, and I coordinated that effort. I was the founder. And it didn't stop there. I did that as a judge. I talked to elementary school students all the time. So if you can see from my past what I've done, you can see the type of AG I will be and what emphasis I will place on those types of activities and encouraging not just lawyers but also judges to go into the classrooms and share their experiences and share their insights of what they've seen in the course of their careers.
Okay, my last question is on marijuana dispensary. I need to know your intake about, I know the statute says that marijuana dispensaries are not allowed to be in front of a public school for more than 500 feet. And there are marijuana dispensaries that are now in front of public schools because they were grandfather clause. If you become the AG, what's your intake on this?
With my intake?
In what would you do? What your office would be?
Well, I will go back to the role of AG and even the role when I served as a judge. I will enforce the law. A lot of times I will have to be an advocate and convey information where I am seeing instances in our system where we need to have more resources or shore up laws to help law enforcement. For example, our technology is woefully behind where it needs to be in keeping up with crime. Our labs are woefully behind where they need to be in having the evidence that's required for the prosecution of certain cases. But this is an issue of policy that with the legislature comes up with, I will enforce the law. And I think if this is a big concern, we would need to talk with law enforcement, see if they're having a problem with this particular issue, bring that to the attention of the lawmakers and try to convince them through data and through specific instances that policy would need to be changed.
Sorry, you?
Judge Moody, I know that you're a really great federal prosecutor.
Tom Kratz with the Bean Law Firm, Tallahassee. Recently, my Rotary Club, we've been talking a lot about human trafficking and raising money for the halfway house because we learned that oftentimes the victims of human trafficking, they don't have any place to go, and sometimes they're undocumented aliens, and so they stay in the shadows. Do you see a role in the Attorney General's office, not only in enforcement of human trafficking, but assisting those victims of it?
Of course. In fact, we recently, the Attorney General, in case you don't know, in addition to all of the other responsibilities like handling appeals, consumer protection, antitrust, Medicaid fraud. Statewide prosecution is one of the things that the AG handles, and they've just been given subject matter jurisdiction over human trafficking. Within the statewide prosecution offices and working with others throughout the state, the AG can ensure that these cases are getting prosecuted. They are difficult to prosecute because victims sometimes are wrapped up into the system themselves as perpetrators of crime, when really they're part of this grander conspiracy to, part of this grander human trafficking group. And so oftentimes you have victims unwilling to come forward. So it's partnering with law enforcement, state attorneys, and then people within the community that can identify these victims, and then having those that have been specifically trained make contact and convincing them and walking them through the process. I think, again, I go back to Pam Moody has done a terrific job of bringing this to the forefront. I doubt Rotary would be addressing this if she had not been pushing this over the last 8 years. It is a problem. I think in 1 year we showed a 54% jump in incidents of human trafficking. Part of this is because we're seeing it more and victims are coming forward. But part of this shows that we're still in Florida plagued by this. We're third in the nation behind Texas and California in terms of incidents of human trafficking. The AG will absolutely play a role in that. They'll lead on certain bodies that are addressing how to best respond to this, and they can use the statewide prosecutor's office and their relationship with law enforcement across the state to do that.
One more question. Representative Rizek.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Moody, for your willingness to put yourself out there to serve our great state. So there is an intersection between law enforcement and culture, race, and all of those type of things. As a top cop, what would be your role in addressing the issues of mistrust and distrust among communities of color as it relates to the way they interact with police officers and the whole judicial system? So what would you do as Attorney General? Okay.
Well, I really appreciate this question, and I also appreciate you saying what a change this is and what I gave up to do this. You know, I did lose my parking spot, and nobody pretends to agree with me anymore. And even on this issue, people yell at me all the time. No, this is a really important question, and I would say this probably more than anything has driven my run and gave me a perspective in why somebody like me, with my particular background, could really make a difference in this role as AG. And number one, yes, this would fall right within the purview of something we would expect as a leader of our law enforcement community, as our top prosecutor, to stand in and start leading the discussion on these issues. And let me just start by saying, I am the wife of the law enforcement officer. I have sent my husband off many a nights wondering how things would go. I understand what they go through and what the families of law enforcement go through as a profession. I am concerned that they are feeling demoralized and attacked as a whole. And what that does to our rule of law cannot be overstated. It is dangerous to have law enforcement not be able to attract good men and women because they do not feel anymore like their profession is a noble one that they want to be a part of. And I will tell you, as someone that has been in discussions across the state of Florida with our sheriffs, many cannot recruit right now, not just because of the danger of the job, but because some people are no longer feeling as though they are valued members of this rule of law that we have set up within our state and our nation. And that cannot be. We have to make sure that men and women know that they are valued, that dedicate their careers to this profession. And I will do that, and I will be an advocate for them in that regard. But that does not mean that we do not address issues that we identify in our system of justice. Because I have been talking my entire career, both as a lawyer and as a judge, that access to courts, that not only due process and the perception of due process, these are all things that keep our state government and our nation's government strong. We are only a rule of law. That is all we are. And it has to be strong. And the only thing that gives our system strength and viability is that those that are affected by it and those that are players in that system, both law enforcement and prosecutors and judges, And those that come in front of the courts know that the results and the opinions are credible and that they've been given due process. So as a lawyer and a judge, I focused on these issues. I started programs to ensure that, I'll just give a quick example, and I know you're hungry, and I hate that I'm the last one before lunch, but I'll give you a quick example. As a juvenile delinquency judge, I noticed that kids were coming into court in custody, and no parents would show up. Whether they were unwilling or unable, no parent would show up with them. And so on my own time, on lunch and at night, I would go around and recruit private attorneys to come and stand in the place of parents with these kids. I started an entire coordinated program called the Attorney Ad Litem Program, where we provided attorneys that came in on their own with these kids that didn't have anybody show up with them. And I'm proud to tell you that that is something that I identified, I started, and now continues. It was taken over by a nonprofit who continues that with children that are coming into the system. So we can say that we are proud of law enforcement and commend all that they do on a daily basis, and I can tell you there's no bigger advocate than as a former prosecutor and wife of a law enforcement officer for what they do. But we can also say we can identify issues, we can have rational, calm discussions about those issues, and try and effectuate change where change needs to be made. And that, more than anything, has compelled me to do this, has compelled me to run for Attorney General. And I hope that all of you will see that at this particular time in our nation and state, this is when we need leaders that are willing to do this, are willing to get yelled at, and not have people pretend to agree with them. And I've decided to resign my position, give it up, so that I might be more of a player and have more of a voice in this discussion.
Give a round of applause to Judge.